All right, we are live. So if you can hear me and you can see me, you know what to do. And I've already seen some people saying 5 by 5 in the chat, which I find to be a little odd considering we weren't live then. But thanks anyway for making sure that everything sounds and looks good. Good to see everybody tonight, and welcome to another live version of Marauder Monday, which is always live. So I guess it's the only version. But there's a lot of things to talk about and a lot of stuff going on in the world. So we get together every single week and go over some of what's happening and give us, ideas about what to be prepared for, which I think is very, very valuable. Hook says 5 by 5. Lily Bishop is here. We've got Exile Reviews. Good to see you. Prepper Nation. Good to see you as well. Thanks for modding tonight. Commander Corvus, Corax, Nevermore. Good to see you. 5 by 5. Loud, load, and clear. Bill Morrow says, which I think you're supposed to clear and then load. I'm not sure how that works, but either way, good to see everybody. And let's definitely get into some of the topics that we're going to talk about tonight, because there's a lot happening and we really need to just be aware of every little detail that's going on right now, because things are changing quickly and moving very fast. And honestly, it's hard to keep up sometimes. Okay, so let's just make it happen. And first things first, we're going to jump right into some news that's going on and things that I believe we should be paying attention to. So here is what's going on. Recently, we had an Oklahoma gas plant explode, okay? And it caught fire, and all the stuff that happens whenever a gas plant explodes, evacuated many people from the surrounding area. And this happened in Oklahoma. And the thing that I am paying attention to when it comes to this situation is the fact that we do not know what caused it. And in fact, everybody's still reporting that we don't necessarily know what caused the fire to burn. Now, this didn't affect a huge amount of people, but it's one more example of a level of infrastructure being sabotaged, possibly, or at least being taken down, which either way is bad for us right now based on the supply chain and everything else. But at the end of the day, we also need to pay attention to the fact that these things could be malicious, and things that used to be chance or just sporadic are now maybe a little bit more malicious. And that's what we really need to be paying attention to, because of the fact that there's a lot of different things going on in the world, and there's a lot of bad actors out there that would like to see things like this happen more often here in the United States. We aren't being affected directly in the same way that people in Europe and other places are being affected by what's going on right now. And it's just obvious that people are going to try to bring some of what is being served to them to our table here in the United States. So these are things that are going on, and this whole situation is more of a reminder for why we need to be paying attention right now. Okay, so this one OK gas plant explosion is something that should give you a little bit of an alarm bell or a little bit of a red flag. Not because it actually had some kind of large amount of damage, not because it affected a lot of things immediately, but it is another example of infrastructure going down, and it is based around mysterious causes. And the reason that I'm bringing that whole situation up is because these mysterious causes are starting to become less mysterious as time goes by and as this conflict overseas continues, okay? So that being said, Predatory Sparrow. Who are the hackers who say they started a fire in Iran? And this is something that you should definitely consider, okay? Hacking is no longer solely digital. It has transversed into the physical realm from time to time, and hackers are capable of affecting things directly that could lead to actual catastrophic scenarios. And this is an example of that happening recently, okay? So, a hacking group called Predatory Sparrow took credit for causing a fire at a steel plant in Iran. And this is something that they've done multiple times now throughout that country, where they have said that the regime there is basically authoritarian and they don't agree with what it is they're trying to enforce. So they're doing what they can to try to disrupt what it is they're trying to accomplish. And they were able to start a fire inside of this factory from a computer. And that should remind you that this is actual physical attacks that can occur via cyber. And this isn't something that is just, science fiction at this point or anything along those lines. So when I look at what happened at the one OK gas plant explosion in Oklahoma, and then I see that this is happening right now in other countries, you should at least consider the concept that there's a possibility that these types of attacks could escalate and continue and can actually cause physical harm rather than just shutting down servers or creating issues in the infrastructure or the logistics systems within some of these companies, they can physically, at least in this case, light them on fire. And when you talk about the gas plant explosion having mysterious causes and not being reported on in the sense of what's causing it, you should at least also consider the fact that there's no real incentive for our government or for the media to report on these things actually being attacks, because all that would do is show how frail we are, how insecure we are, and how easy these attacks are to perpetrate without any real consequences. So in my opinion, it would actually be detrimental for them to report on that truth if that's what actually happened. But this is an example that happened just yesterday of the same exact style of event occurring via a cyber attack. And as these attacks continue, we now also have a group in Russia declaring war on 10 different nations. And Russia has now attacked, or at least this hacking group has attacked Poland and has shut down multiple government websites in Poland right now. We know Poland is a NATO nation, and we know that ads are just going to play sometimes, even if I don't want them to. But these are things that are going on right this second that we need to be paying attention to, because now we have Killnet, which is a cyber group out of Russia, taking down different Polish government websites, which you tell me whether or not that could be considered an actual act of war or something along those lines, especially when we're talking about NATO countries being affected by this. But they also claim that they have declared war on 10 different countries, okay? Now, let's talk about what those 10 countries are so that you have some idea as to whether or not you should expect possible disruptions in your area, or at least just be aware of the fact that this could happen in your vicinity, okay? So this is just what I could find. I didn't get the full list on the 10 nations, although I tried to look for it. But at least we know it's Germany, Italy, Romania, Norway, Lithuania, and the United States, okay? So that tells me that here in the United States, groups like this one are already targeting us and have the ability to do things like what those other groups, Predatory Sparrow, are capable of. And then we have the events like the one OK gas plant explosion, and we have to at least start connecting these dots and saying, look, this might all be completely standalone, but we also can admit that the possibility of these different events being at least connected in the sense of how they were perpetrated is something we should consider. And if that's what's happening, then it makes a lot of things a little bit more dangerous than they were before. And so this is a reminder as to what's happening out there and why we need to be prepared, and why we should consider the fact that this, fourth generation warfare is already affecting us in one way or another. Okay, so now I'm looking in the chat. Kim's Rural Life says World War III around the corner. Many people would say it has already started. So there's a lot of interesting things, when you want to debate that scenario. But either way, we are looking at this conflict escalating and spreading, regardless of how you want to look at it, at least in my opinion. We have the spirit animal here. We have bees' nuts, which we all know bees make the best nuts. I'm not sure what I meant by that, but you figure it out on your own. And then probably not an agent says, somebody just nuked me already. All right. So, and some of us have those types of preparedness plans, I guess. Now, just to touch base on some of the things that are happening over there, which we know is just a regular occurrence at this point, but we have to at least keep tabs on it and understand what's going on. So we have a Russian rocket attack on Donetsk apartment block that kills 24. We have Moscow temporarily halting gas flows to Europe. Now, obviously, we know people are dying over there. We know that. And it's always the innocent people who pay the ultimate price. And it's not fair to people like you or I when governments that don't listen to what we have to say go into war with each other and then expect you and I to do all the dying, which is basically what's happening over there. And of course, we can talk about militaries as well, but we also know the militaries of each country are just following orders too. So they're being told by their government exactly how to handle these scenarios as well. Either way, we know that these attacks keep escalating and keep affecting civilian areas in both countries at this point in time, because we know that there's been some counterattacks into villages within Russia as well from the resistance forces. But we also know that the Nord Stream 1 pipeline has been shut down for routine maintenance. And that's actually something that might be even more detrimental to Europe than anything else at this point in time, based on the fact that they're already expecting gas shortages come wintertime, okay? So the Nord Stream pipeline begins annual maintenance, with Europe concerned the shutdown could be extended. So the whole concept here is that Russia shut down the pipeline in order to perform routine maintenance, and they don't necessarily have to turn it back on. And so everyone's worried that within the next 10 days, which is when this is supposed to be resolved and the maintenance is supposed to be complete, whether or not they'll actually turn everything back on. And if this doesn't get turned back on, it suddenly becomes a very dire emergency for parts of Europe, especially before winter, when it comes to how they're going to heat their homes and how they're going to just run off of the energy they currently have, which is not enough to support their population. So this is a big deal, and this could be one of those straws that breaks the camel's back moments, because basically at the end of the day, if Russia was to decide to not turn this gas pipeline back on and not supply the people of that region with this resource, they might cause a further conflict due to the fact that it will turn into a survival scenario for a lot of people in that area. And if that's how people are going to be affected by these decisions, then there's really nothing left to risk in the sense of getting into a conventional conflict. So this is something we should definitely keep an eye on. It should last, 10 to 12 days, like it says right here. And after that 12-day period, if it hasn't been turned back on, there will be cause for concern. And people, if you are in Eastern Europe or even countries like Germany, and you rely on things like natural gas to heat your home and to cook your food and to use any other form of energy, in the sense of natural gas and what it's capable of, then be prepared to not have access to it, because this is where we are at this point in time. And countries are getting greedier, and countries are also getting more isolationist, because maybe Russia will decide they need more natural gas because of the conflict and because of their resources being stretched, that they can't afford to just turn this back on and give countries who are in direct opposition of what they're doing right now access to a resource that's vital to survival. So that is something that should definitely be considered, okay? And while we're going through some of these world events that are happening right now, we can also talk about the fact that we have Iran, China, and Russia preparing for military maneuvers in Latin America. Now, there's been a lot of talk for a lot of time now about the idea that large amounts of people are coming through our southern border that are unvetted and unchecked, and there is a lot of cause for concern for who might be hiding out within some of those groups. And here's what's going on right now. Now, these military drills have been happening from time to time. They are not something that is brand new per se. There's been a lot of different situations where we've had Russia involvement in Venezuela, where we've had Russia in countries like Nicaragua, and China, of course, has been just about everywhere at this point in time. But the timing and the amount of troop placement in this region is concerning, because it's obviously strategic, if there was to be something going off here very soon, to have these troops positioned south of our border in countries that are friendly to their cause, in order to, well, as you know, prepare for some type of either defensive maneuver or offensive maneuver. It is good to have a staging ground in order to be able to be more organized for whatever it is you are staging for. And obviously, the closer that they can stage these troops and their equipment and everything else related to what they would need in order to, well, that is more strategic and more beneficial. So we should definitely be concerned and keeping an eye on this whole military exercise happening in Latin America when it comes to these three countries, specifically Iran, China, and Russia. I mean, that's the three countries that pose the greatest risk to us and create some of the most incendiary situations, which would escalate very quickly if we weren't in a more stable position. So when we look at these three countries and we understand how close and what their proximity will be to our country, and the fact that many of them are invested in the idea of the United States not existing anymore, well, I think that we kind of can come to our own conclusions of whether or not this is a cause for concern. Okay, so I wanted to go through a lot of this kind of global summary really quickly, because that's what a lot of people are focused on right now. It's what's been eating up a lot of the space in the last 6 months. But at the end of the day, we have to pay attention to it. We have to be aware of the fact that we are still a target in many ways, and we have to be prepared for these things to get worse and possibly escalate. But we also need to keep our eyes out for what else is happening, and remember that what is affecting us directly is what's going to hurt the most at first. And there's a lot of things happening here within the United States, and there's a lot of indicators to show that our systems are failing us in many, many ways. And while our systems are failing, people are being left to the wayside, and those people who are being left behind are going to eventually become dangerous. And that's just how it works. It's not something that I wish for, and it's not something that I want to see happen, but this is just the way of the world at this point in time. And there's many countries right now that we are going to have to watch and learn from, in the sense of how they handle this downward spiral, because in many ways they're going to experience it before we do, which I'll demonstrate here for you very shortly. But I want to get back in the chat for a minute and talk to everybody here, just so we can kind of have a little bit of conversation going. You know, I definitely appreciate all of the suggestions and input that you guys put in the chat. Let's see, Blue Collar Prepper is here. Good to see you. Oki Khan is here as well. Things are getting ready to pop. And Oki Khan, I think a lot of us have felt that way for quite some time now. So it just feels like the longer it goes on for, the more likely it's actually going to happen. And I think that's what we'd like to avoid. Nobody wants to see anything pop per se. We don't want to see that, but we are watching a slow decline of the modernized Western society, while other societies in third world countries and developing countries are actually experiencing that right now. So we have to pay attention to them so that we can know what to expect here, because at some point there's a good chance we might catch up to what they're doing. Okay. Now, Jordambi, you've been working as an IT professional for the last 20 years, and a move to cut costs. Companies moved sensitive applications from in-house to cloud hosting, and that is an issue. We all know that cloud hosting is definitely less secure than in-house, you know, being stored on hardware and whatnot. But here we are suffering from a lot of our own doing, aren't we? And that's exactly what's going on in the world. We have done a lot of this to ourselves, and now we're no longer as secure as we used to be, due to the fact that ease of access has taken over guaranteed security, or ease of access has become more valuable or more prioritized than our ability to defend ourselves from possible malicious encounters. And that's exactly what we're experiencing now, are a lot of malicious encounters, especially in the digital world. Okay. Now, on Smash Media, can you talk about the nuke PSA from New York? Okay. So New York City recently put out a public statement, okay, or a public service announcement about nuclear preparedness and what to do in the event of a nuclear explosion. And I thought that was eye-opening in some ways, because this is not a topic that's visited regularly at this point in time. Yet here we are in 2022, having New York City decide it was pertinent for them to put out at least some form of information about it. Now, the information that was shared and suggested within that PSA might not necessarily be, let's just say, overly helpful, but it shows that they're trying to at least put some messaging out there. And what they're trying to do is give people who are desperate with no other thought process as to what to do, something to do. When people are panicked, the best thing you do is give them a job. So now they have a job, if this does happen, to hopefully keep some of the panic down. And in the PSA, they mostly discuss needing to wait for authorities and await further instructions, basically, which is often how they approach emergency scenarios. But I think we should all understand at this point in time, with the leadership we have in places like New York and the leadership we have within our own federal government, I mean, are you going to await further instructions, or are you going to trust what those instructions will be, based on the fact that a lot of the respect anybody had for some of these institutions has left the building quite a long time ago? But that being said, if you want to go ahead and talk about that, I believe we can go ahead and talk about that. So give me 1 second here. Okay. Just got to do a couple of things real quick. All right. And we can do this whole move. And you guys will enjoy it, I'm sure. So I'll share this. And I'm not sure how the sound will work, so let's just give it a try and see what happens, okay?
So there's been a nuclear attack. Don't ask me how or why, just know that the big one has hit, okay? So what do? There are 3 important steps that I want you to remember. Step 1, get inside fast. You, your friends, your family, get inside. And no, staying in the car is not an option.
Probably
you need
really
to get into a building and move away from the windows.
Like a tornado.
Step 2, stay inside. Shut all doors and windows. Have a basement? Head there. If you don't have one, get as far into the middle of the building as possible. If you were outside after the blast, get clean immediately. Remove and bag all outer clothing to keep radioactive dust or ash away from your body. Step 3. Stay tuned. Follow media for more information. Don't forget to sign up for Notify NYC for official alerts and updates. And don't go outside until officials say it's safe. All right, you've got this.
You've got this. All you have to do in a nuclear blast is go inside, stay away from the windows, stay put, and wait further instructions. Now, look, I understand that this is very rudimentary information and that they were just trying to get something out into the public so that they could put some kind of effort into getting people prepared for the possibility. I get that. But this is extremely elementary information. And it's basically the same advice they would give you during a tornado. Let's be honest. Get inside, stay away from the windows. If you've got a basement, go there and, wait for authorities to let you know if it's safe or not before you come back out. I mean, that's it. That's as good as they've got when it comes to that. A long time ago, we used to have nuclear fallout shelters in most of our major cities, and there was designated places for you to go in case of a nuclear event. Many of those have been abandoned. They have been left to become very decrepit and just overall are basically in a constant state of decay. But at the end of the day, those were a decent answer to a real nuclear threat because they got you underground into a secure facility that was built to withstand things like nuclear fallout. And New York City isn't going to tell you to get down into the subways because that's going to create a huge amount of panic and a huge amount of violence and a huge amount of issues down in the subway tunnels where they can't afford to just have people be. But it's interesting that countries like Russia and in Moscow, they have all of their tunnel systems built around the idea of being able to store the population down there in case of the same exact event. So we've seen what countries like Poland have done in the case of nuclear preparedness. And I went over that nuclear preparedness pamphlet that they put out for their citizens, and it was very detailed and had a lot of information, and it had information all the way down to the idea of if you are hiding from an enemy soldier, should you hide in a group or alone, or what should you do, right? So that's some very detailed stuff that they're not putting out for the people here. And they went through the problems of building out a video and going through production and trying to make everything look trim and professional just to put out the most rudimentary information around. So this tells us a couple things. One, it tells us that they're at least feeling the burn to put something out. They understand that this is becoming more and more of a real threat, and people are demanding that something be said or done about it. So they did that, but all it really was a placation. It's just to placate the masses, to make them feel like somebody's telling them something. And now, if a nuke goes off, everybody in New York City knows, it's fine. I'm just going to go inside, and I'm going to stay away from the windows, and then I'll just wait till they tell me we're good. So it tries to get rid of panic by giving people something. And it's obviously, it's as useful as you would think it is. But here's exactly where we are. Let's see. Richard Ratano says, in the city, okay? I don't know what that's referring to, but yes, you said that. Let's see. Home on the range. Yes, letting idiot politicians threaten our existence is exactly what we've been doing for quite some time. So here we are, and it's becoming worse and worse every day because of the people who are making decisions, generally not good ones, okay? And okay, Khan, but hey, you've got this. Exactly, you've got this. Don't worry about what will happen after the nuclear explosion because we'll come save you. We'll take care of you, or we'll tell you what to do. And I don't think that it was very pertinent of them to remind everyone that if you are going to your basement or you are going to stay in the middle of your building away from the windows, you should probably have some supplies with you, like some food or water or something, because if you don't, you're just going to be sitting there waiting for how long for emergency services to respond or to tell you that you're good to go. It is what it is. But at the end of the day, they're concerned enough about the reality of where we are at this point in time that they felt the need to put this out there. That's exactly what we should be taking away from it, because otherwise it's just a waste of resources for no reason. So, and L. Miller says they'll hit DC before NYC. Well, I think if they're going to hit anything in the sense of major cities, I think they're going to hit a lot of things all at the same time, mostly because otherwise, what's the point? Might as well do it all at once and let it rip, right? Brian Keith Prepper says, sup, Magic Man, just got here, been working in the garden. Well, that's good. I'm glad you've been in the garden. I'm glad you're trying to figure out ways to produce your own food because things are getting real tight in that regard. So let's talk about some of the tightness going on and how our system's somewhat failing us. But at the same time, we can also do a little bit of conceptualizing here when it comes to oil. Okay, so oil prices. They're down, actually. They're still down. So WTI crude, we're at 102.8 per barrel, okay? So there was still a lot of talk about this possibly jumping up to 185 a barrel if Russia was to cut off certain supply lines. That hasn't happened yet, but that possibility still exists. Now, the other thing to keep in mind when it comes to oil and the fact that gas is going down slightly as well is because demand, in the sense of the way capitalism works, is no longer there due to the increased price of these items. So I can't afford gas, so I'm not buying gas. So therefore, gas is becoming inherently less expensive because people like myself are no longer purchasing it. So supply is getting a chance to grow back, which means that the demand is less, which means that things cost a little bit less. But how long is that going to last for? We're only one situation away from gas skyrocketing once again. And all it takes is for certain countries to decide that certain resources aren't going to flow the way that they used to, or they can decide that certain fiat currencies are no longer applicable to trade with oil. So this is why we're talking about oil right now, because it has a chance to just go insane at any point in time. And honestly, I'm surprised it hasn't yet in many ways, but then again, it makes sense. I have literally stopped doing certain things just because I don't want to spend the gas. There is a training regiment coming up here soon, which I would like to attend. And I literally am trying to figure out if I can budget the gas to attend it because it's a few hours from my house. And so, you know, things add up quickly and gas is expensive. And then when we're looking at preparedness right now, we're all like, okay, so I need to get more food. I need to get more water. I need to get more ammo. And maybe need to get some more guns or whatever it is. But do I really want to spend $130 on gas to go to a training thing? And now here's what I'll tell you is like, yes, I mean, I will, because the training is actually going to be more valuable than most of the things that I just described, because without those skills, a lot of that stuff might not do me any good. But the other side of that coin is that some of this is just related to other things like basic, you know, necessities of life, visiting family, or maybe going to a retreat or whatever it is. There's also some things going on right now I'd like to go participate in that I can't afford the gas to do because I kind of prioritize what I'm spending that money on. And a lot of Americans are in that same boat right now. And so that's what's happening in many ways, at least in my opinion. Okay, now, 70 for my little hatchback TDI. Good thing I get 500 miles per tank. Night Critey Paul, that is true. And having a TDI right now might not be the worst thing. Although diesel's very expensive, it does seem to last in the sense of gas mileage, especially in those small little Volkswagens. So good for you on that. But here we are trying our best to get by. Now, a lot of you are going to scoff at what I just said when I release a video in the next couple of days of me shooting a expensive high-end Kimber 1911. But what I want to preface when I say things like that, and then I come out, I'm like, check out this expensive thing I have, right? Always keep in mind that whenever you guys see me with like new firearms and stuff like that are really expensive, I generally sold one or two other firearms to finance it. I'm no longer just buying things out of pocket anymore. I'm trying to upgrade equipment and get to a certain caliber of gear that makes me comfortable and feel good about sitting on that gear for quite some time. And I am working on I guess you'll call it a self-imposed lockdown in the sense of firearms purchases and the like, because I am going to be training exclusively on a single rifle platform for the next however long. So that way I can be the master of one instead of the master of none. And that is something that's hard for me to do as somebody who's a firearms enthusiast and a gun collector in many ways. But at the end of the day, that's actually what I need to do to be worth anything when it comes to those skills. So that's what I'm going to be doing. And maybe some of you should follow suit, because I think a lot of us have that same similar issue. You know, I've got 7 ARs and they're all different setups and all different purposes and all different optics and everything else. Great. How often do you train with all 7 of them? Oh, like 1 per month. Okay, great. Well, 7 times 7 months is actually going to do you better than 1 every month for 7 months, right? So that's just what I'm doing in order to get better and more proficient. and it's hard. So, I'm trading in a few things and I'm getting one thing that's much higher quality so that I can be content with it. And that's what I'll use. Okay. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, let's talk about other issues going on here with our system. Now, I told you we talk about this again, why we need to watch out for what's going on with some of these third world and developing countries and how we can see what's happening with them so we can be prepared for what's going to happen here. Okay. As of June 30th, the agricultural price index is 34% higher compared to January 2021. Maize and wheat prices are 47% and 42% higher, respectively, compared to January 2021, while rice prices are about 8% lower. Okay, but here's what where you need to pay attention. This is what I was trying to get to earlier. Okay, domestic price inflation continues to rise around the world, with 94% of low income, 89% of low middle income, 83% of upper middle income, and 70% of high income countries experiencing high food price inflation. Okay, now what does that mean? Well, it should tell you. Okay, so 70% of the high income countries are experiencing it. 94% of the low income countries are experiencing it, which means that all the low income countries in the world are dealing with high inflation in food, and they were already low income and they were already desperate and in many ways probably starving. So because of that, we can see what's going to happen in these other countries first, because they're likely to experience the worst of it before we do. We are in a high income country. And so that being said, yes, we're being affected by it, but not in the same way as some of these lower income countries. Oh, hold on. We have an issue. Give me 1 second. I promise I'll be right back with everybody. While I destroy my entire computer, because that was the most reasonable thing I could do. Hold on, I'm still here, I promise. Don't leave me. I'll be lonely without you. Okay, back into the cockpit. We've got this, don't worry. Somebody just didn't like the way I look today. I can understand that, actually. All right, so... Okay, I'm sort of back, but things look bad right now because, well, let's be honest, it's a worse camera. But things just fell apart in a bad way, and I'm kind of not happy with what just happened. So either way, I gave you guys a chance to read the article, which was probably what I meant to do the whole time. So let's be honest. I can always come up with a better reason for why this is going to work out. But give me 1 second because I want to make sure that this is going to be a relatively decent experience. And right now it looks like I have the entire power of the sun shining on my face, which, might make some people upset because I'm hogging all that solar power they're trying to get. Okay, so I feel a little bit better, but whatever. We're good to go. Now, as long as everybody can hear me and see me still, I think we're going. Robert Larson says it's the Iranians. Well, you know what? I think it's probably the Libyans. Okay, so moving on from there, because I had to. I just had to. It was a good time. We also have some water issues. If you guys didn't know, we're supposed to have these systems in place on how the West Coast is going to have enough water. And there's all these different reserves, and there's all these different diversions, and there's all this different, information around water rights and whatnot when it comes to trying to conserve water to make sure the entire population of the West Coast has access to it. But the best part about it is that they don't. So water over there is becoming a huge issue. And this is a big drought that's going on in the West, okay? And basically, many of these water rights are over 100 years old. And so there's a lot of weird legal stuff going on when it comes to water access and restrictions and whatnot within the western area of the United States. But the problem is that there's just not enough water to support this population. The people who are in charge of trying to make sure that you can drink water in your area, if you live on the West Coast, have not done a good job of making sure that that could still happen. And in fact, they were just hoping that one day the drought would go away, which of course it has not. So this is where we are at this point in time. There's not enough water to farm correctly. There's not enough water for the people to even water the grass or have enough water for any of their usual daily activities. But they're getting to the point where they're going to start restricting people's ability to bathe and everything else. And that's exactly why you, A, shouldn't rely on the government for anything, and B, why you should understand that the people who are in charge do not have your best interests at heart, because they would have figured out ways to make this work had they not just been gambling with the idea that this drought might just go away on its own. So, Purposeful Prepper, good to see you. Glad you're here. Awesome Asen, good to see you as well. And make your own water, says Jatsky Fee, which I totally get. So that's a problem. That's where we are. California hasn't built a new reservoir in 50 years. Maybe that's the problem. David Allen. Yes, the investment in critical infrastructure for what is necessary for survival doesn't exist in the United States at this point in time. So that should concern everybody, because they're not caring about what you need or don't need. But if we're going to talk about agriculture and we're going to talk about systems failing our country as well as around the world, then we can't do that without talking about what's happening in the Netherlands right now. Okay, so the Netherlands farmers are, protesting all of these different regulations and whatnot from the government. And there's a lot of information surrounding ideas that the government's telling them not to grow food, that the government's putting all these restrictions on their ability to grow food. There's a lot of weird gray stuff going on there where you can't necessarily verify the exact things that are happening in some ways. But what I will say is that this article is from somebody who lives there that's not a farmer, and this shows you their thought process on what they think when it comes to this scenario. And this should concern you, because this is how the average person thinks about what would happen here if this exact scenario was occurring, okay? Dutch supermarket shelves go empty while farmers do exact opposite of their job and block our food. Our food, okay? So this person's opinion is that the job of farmers is to make food for everyone, and that it's their food, even though the farmers are the ones who are growing it and producing it and harvesting it and then sending it into the supply, okay? So farmers have continued to protest by blocking supermarket distribution chains, and honestly, we're just kind of done. Look, I'm sorry to tell the writer of the story this, but you're not in charge of what farmers do or don't do when it comes to food, regardless of whether or not you're going to get to eat. So it's not their job to make you food. They chose to grow food to make a living off of it, and the government there is making it impossible to do so. So therefore, they are not growing the food, and it's not their responsibility to make sure that you have something to eat. But that's how this person thinks, and that's how you should really think the average person will do the same thing. They're going to think the same way, okay? So let's see. Let's get back to, well, here's some supermarket shelves in the Netherlands right now. So obviously it's an issue. People are not able to get the food that they need, okay? Now, supermarkets are warning that millions of euros of food could go to waste if farmers don't remove their blockades and let us eat cheese. Research agency Romler has identified the empty shelves are not being seen across the country, and that where shelves are running empty, customers are also hoarding stock, stretching the problem further. So not only is the farmers the issue, okay, the farmers are the problem and what they're doing is the issue, but people who are stockpiling food based on the fact that it's disappearing and they don't have access to it anymore are also the problem. So farmers are the problem because they're not making the food that they are supposed to give me, and preppers, or people who are just trying to be a little bit ahead of the game, are the problem because they're taking more than they deserve, and they shouldn't have all that, because why are they getting it? What, don't they understand that more food will show up eventually? That's the thought process of a lot of these people. And this is someone who wrote this article and actually believes this. And this is a problem. Look, this supermarket is empty, okay? Now, emergency regulations are being issued in certain municipalities in order to deal with the challenges of empty shelves at the grocery stores. But this person literally is trying to say that farmers are at fault here because they are supposed to make us food. That's their job. And that is not how this works. And that is exactly the thought process of people who are going to become dangerous the more and more this system falls apart. people have a right to protest, and farmers are people, and they also should be able to make money off what they do, or else they shouldn't do it. So the fact that the government's making that impossible for them is why this is happening. And the fact that people are mad about that is too bad, because you aren't growing your own food. You don't have food now. That's your own fault. I'm sorry. And you know what? I wouldn't have the ability to just make my own food overnight if the same thing happened here. But luckily, I have a food reserve to tap into in case that were to happen. So look, they're passing the buck in many ways. They're passing the blame, but these people are unwilling to prepare for themselves. And this is the consequence, but they don't want to admit that. And that's the issue. Now, what happens when that food runs out in other places that maybe aren't as, let's just say, domesticated like Western society, and the fact that these people are writing articles about how they deserve the food rather than doing anything about it? Well, people aren't usually going to go just grow their own food or find alternative resources. Instead, they're going to protest and riot and loot. And that's what's happening in countries like Sri Lanka right now. So this is what I meant by paying attention to what's going on in these developing countries, or these third world countries, or these just lesser developed countries like Sri Lanka, and prepare for what's happening there to occur here, because the ingredients are right for this recipe to eventually turn to disaster. All right. So what else are we seeing when it comes to the Sri Lankan riots and food protests? Well, we are also seeing quite a display of leadership failure. So the Sri Lanka president and prime minister are resigning because of the protests, right? So instead of fixing the problems of food and fuel shortages, they are just leaving because they can't fix it, because you can't fix what's happening. This whole system crashed and burned 2 years ago, but we're just now starting to really feel the effects of it. And these people aren't capable of fixing the problem and don't have the gumption to stick through it, even though their country probably needs them right now. Now, a lot of people will say, well, it's their fault this happened and they're the ones who should leave. I get that. But what person is actually going to get in there and fix the problem? This is not a problem easily fixed by a single politician or any one person in power. So what the problem is now going to be is that we have people leaving their post at a time when they're needed the most, because they have no answers and there's no solutions to be able to get us out of a lot of this mess. And that's exactly what's happening in Sri Lanka. And with the protesters storming the officials' homes and setting fires to the buildings and all this stuff that happens when people get this desperate about food, especially, they said, well, that's enough. We're out of here. Okay. Now, a lot of people say, well, that's victory for the people because they removed the incompetent leadership from government. And there's a lot of people who believe similar things should happen in countries like the United States, right? Well, the problem is who are you going to put in? Who's going to fix the problem? Now the problem is still existing, and there's no one managing the crisis to try to find a solution. Do I think our current government is managing the crisis to find a solution? No, of course not. They're terrible at everything. But what I'm trying to say is that lack of leadership is sometimes worse than bad leadership, because at least there's a singular point of focus of what's happening and who's to blame, rather than anarchy, which is in many ways what you experience when your government decides to leave the building. So this is what you should definitely keep an eye on. And strangely enough, we have evidence of similar things occurring in Western society at this point in time, with Boris Johnson resigning from his position in the UK because of the same exact reasons, okay? He's no longer prime minister because people were mad at him. He couldn't provide the solutions. Nobody was getting answers, and he had no answers, so it was time to go. Now, that's a very simplified version of what's going on over there. But what I'm trying to say is that these are high-level people in high-level positions that usually wouldn't just give up their seat of power unless it was necessary. And right now, they're finding it to be necessary because they know that whoever steps into that seat next isn't going to have a better time or better luck, because there is no real solution to what's happening at this point in time. Governments can't fix this problem. The best thing they can hope for is to wait it out and eventually catch back up. And you know what would help catch them back up? You know what would help the supply chain have less strain and would help the demand go down? Less people. I don't know how that would possibly happen to you. You let me know in the chat. But the other side of this whole resignation that you should be keeping an eye on is the fact that one of the main focuses is the support for the resistance over in the European conflict right now. Saying that, well, now that this guy's gone, well, what about the support for that? Okay. I don't know. You tell me. But what I'm trying to say is that it's interesting there's so much weight being put on that aspect of it rather than the causes and the reasons for why these people are abandoning their posts. Instead, they're worried about, well, who's going to support these people now? Which should show you that no matter who's in charge, they are pushing for this thing to escalate and to have continued intervention from outside influences. And that's exactly what you can expect. It's going to keep happening. And that's what they're so concerned about here in this article. Not about the fact that the most prominent leader in the UK decided to leave their post in the middle of a crisis due to the fact that they're probably doing the right thing. In all honesty, if I was in that situation, maybe I would have to leave too. But what I'm trying to say is their biggest concern is, well, what about them over there? Who's going to support them still? Is this still going to go? And that concerns me, and it should probably concern you. Now, we also have what's going on in China. Now, this is the other side of that argument, which is what I want you guys to think about. Okay, I want you to pay attention to this. Okay, now, massive protests break out in China as bank scandal leaves thousands unable to cash out. Now, apparently there's been a deposit freeze from certain banks in China all the way since April at this point in time. And now some of these people have been unable to get cash out of their banks since April. And there's an estimated $1.5 billion of assets frozen in these Chinese banks. So protests have erupted and people are starting to riot in China against these banks, saying that you better give us our money or else, right? Well, this looks a lot like, I don't know, the 1930s in some ways. The other thing to keep in mind, though, is that this is all happening. These people are protesting. This is not the first major protest we've seen in China over recent years. There's been a lot of angst about certain lockdowns, and there's been a lot going on in Hong Kong. But at the end of the day, guess what's not happening in China? Xi Jinping is not leaving, okay? That's not how this works over there. So you're not going to see resignations in China in their leadership. No. All they're going to do is come down stronger with a more authoritarian approach. And that is exactly what should concern you. Because the countries like the UK, which are in some ways supposedly democratic, right? So kind of like the United States is supposedly democratic in some way or another. These are the countries where people are just leaving their post because there's no real consequences to it. And you know what? It's because they can't help us, the regular people, anymore. But at the same time, China isn't going to leave their post, which means they're going to continually gain strength and continually move forward in their agenda because the same people are going to be in charge no matter what the people there say. Now, I think there's always a good argument for why the people should hold the most power and be able to remove people from these positions of power if they're no longer able to execute their job. But what China will show us via the way that they act and the way that they perceive their own people is that sometimes, especially during a crisis, there are reasons why tyrannical governments will possibly survive or move forward in a more aggressive manner because they have no one there to stop them. And that is what's dangerous about these other superpowers, is that they don't have the input of the people to worry about when it comes to what we will or won't do. And that is something that, although it's the best part of living in the United States and it's what it should be in the sense of, you know, political discourse and people having opinions and having their voices heard, in a crisis scenario, in a giant, large-scale global conflict emergency, countries like China will likely have an upper hand when it comes to just steamrolling through whatever agenda it is they need to do. Now, Americans are good about coming together and saying enough's enough and smashing somebody when they try to pull that stuff. It's been a long time since we've all been on the same page. And unfortunately, the last time that happened, it took an extremely catastrophic and tragic event for that to occur. So this is where we are, and this is what we need to be concerned about. And on the coattails of what's going on around the world in the sense of leadership abandoning their posts and our systems crashing in many, many ways, we also have assassinations occurring. And that should also tell you where the state of this world currently is. Okay, we know Shinzo Abe was recently assassinated. He was a former prime minister of Japan, but he also was in charge during the initial run of the 2020 crisis, right? And there's a lot of angst and hatred because of the way things were handled back then. But we also know that these are the types of situations that occur which could eventually lead to that global conflict we've all been trying to avoid. Because this is how World War I started in many ways. When you talk about Franz Ferdinand, this is the scenario that occurred in many ways. Okay, so I'm not saying that this particular situation is what's going to cause it similarly to that, but what I am saying is that there's other scenarios like this that can happen where that exact situation could unfold. And now that it is happening in a very public way to very powerful and well-known figures around the world, we should be concerned about the wrong thing happening at the wrong time in the wrong place by the wrong person. And that could easily occur at any moment of any day at this point in time. Okay, so the chat is going strong. And in fact, I don't know if I'm just way behind on it or if you guys are just cruising tonight. But either way, I think we're having a hard time in the sense of getting ahead of a lot of these issues that's happening. And I think that we, as preppers, need to be understanding and honest about the idea that things could get really bad very quickly, and that we should at least consider the idea that other forces around the world are invested in ruining what we have and are willing to do things that would step outside of the box of the norm in order to accomplish their goals. Okay. Now, Brian Keith, I'm not trying to compete with Harry Potter ever, because let's be honest, Daniel Radcliffe's post-Harry Potter career has been quite interesting. And if you haven't seen Guns Akimbo, I definitely suggest it as a good watch because, I mean, man, it was awesome. Anyway, now, everybody, we needed to stay together, okay? There's a lot of infighting and there's a lot of other stuff going on in the preparedness community. And a lot of people, I don't like this person or I don't like that person or whatever it is, okay? We need to get over our own crap and realize that what's really important is that more and more people are prepared. We don't have to do it the same way. We don't have to think the same things. We don't have to be in the same ideologies or religion or anything like that. But what we need to do is come together as a community and be ready for these things to really fall apart. Because I think we all know that at some point in time, we might need to rely on our skills and our preps and our equipment more than we originally wish we would have had to, okay? And that's exactly where we are. We need to be on top of things with each other in the sense of what this community is about to go through. And I think we're going to go through some things, even if we aren't necessarily going to experience them exactly the way we thought we would. Okay. If going through things means losing our homes and our jobs and our money because everything's too expensive and everything becomes too difficult, well, that's just part of the deal. But if it also means a hot conflict that comes closer to home than what we previously anticipated, we need to be able to respond to that. And that's exactly where we're going. And just so everybody knows, if Derek Boodle really thinks I'm disguised as a skunk, then you clearly have not invested in your skunk studies very much, because I don't look much like one, although I do smell like one from time to time. And that's an issue that I have, and it's a self-defense mechanism that I use to my advantage. So you better watch out, because skunk prepper are going to find you one day. Anyway, moving past that, just trying to keep everybody on the lighter side of things. But I just want everyone here to make sure things actually are moving forward. Be progressive in your preparedness. Be ready for things to get more difficult than you expected. And don't be surprised if something crazy happens. Like, don't be so built into your own thought process that you're unwilling to accept that things outside of your control could occur. And don't be so built into your thought process that things you said would never occur couldn't occur, because they can still. It doesn't matter. And you know what? By the way, we might all literally get swallowed up by Yellowstone still. The Cascadia fault line might just explode one day. There's a lot of natural disasters that could occur that could wipe us out just as easily as a global conflict. But we talk about things based on a priority of what's going on, and we talk about things based on what's more likely. And right now, with everything happening, we are being pushed to a more and more likely scenario involving global conflict. Okay, so either way, be ready for it. Do what you can to be ahead of the game. And if you guys can't get along, just at least have some peace in the idea that you're both prepared And that means that you don't have to worry about each other. And that's really what this is all about. Let's get less people that we have to worry about out there, because there's so many we're going to have to worry about. We are literally going to have to worry about almost every single person that you can see when you look out your window. You're going to have to worry about every single person you've ever ran into at the grocery store. You're going to have to worry about your next door neighbors in many ways, unless you get to know them now and build up some kind of relationship and level of trust that puts you on a level playing field and gives them the concept that you're not here as a free handout, but you're also not a threat to them, which means they can at least maybe watch your 6 or your 3 or your 9 or whichever side of the street they're on in order to give you another strategic asset during these issues. So just want to put that out there. I'm very adamant about us all trying to get into a more accepting state of mind when it comes to others within the preparedness community. And I will also say that Texas Gold Bull says, if you're not in shape, you're going to die. Flannel Daddy said that. And honestly, there's probably a lot of truth to that. And I would say that me getting in shape over the last year has been the best asset for myself when it comes to preparedness, and also the best asset for myself when it comes to being able to take care of my family. Because you know what? If I can't grab my kids and run out the door and sprint off like a madman, then what am I going to do? Because you know what? I can run pretty fast and I can do a lot by myself, but I got a family to take care of, and they deserve for me to be in the best fighting shape I can be in order to deal with whatever might come our way and take care of them the best way I can. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I think that it's important. And, you know, and some of my good friends and people I train with, they're working on it too. And I know they've lost like more than 100 pounds in some cases. And unfortunately, it's a difficult scenario and it's really hard to get ahead of, but man, it makes a huge difference. So keep that in mind. Do what you guys can now to be ready for what you may have to do then. And you know, I know not everybody can get into shape, and I know some people have health issues, and I know some people are, you know, wheelchair bound or whatever it is, and that's all fine. But then push your assets towards something that is going to benefit the rest of your community and the rest of your network in a way that's sensible for what you're capable of. And that's the best thing I can say about it, because man, we got to do more. We got to do more. Okay. So without anything else to say about what is going on with our system collapsing, the failures of those who are in leadership right now, and the fact that we're being abandoned in many ways, I want you guys to just join the Discord, get in there, talk to each other, make some good connections, go to our different state channels or different country channels, try to meet people that are like-minded, so that way you might be able to build a little bit more of a buffer when it comes to all-out chaos and SHTF. And at the same time, you know, you can say hi to me too if you want. But putting that out there, I want everybody to be good to go. And man, train now while you can. That's skills you can't acquire post SHTF. You might be able to read books. You might be able to have ammo. You might be able to have food, but you're not going to be able to get more training. So get the training you can while you can. And besides that, that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.